The South Sea bubble wasn't caused by greedy speculators. It was a deliberate debt restructuring scheme designed by the British Treasury. The government wanted stock prices to rise, and they got exactly what they asked for. By the end of this video, you'll understand how the British state engineered the entire South Sea scheme to solve its debt problem, why the stock price rising was the point and not the accident, and the real reason every major financial crisis has a government fingerprint, and it changes how you see every market mania you've ever been told about. If you know anything about the South Sea bubble, you know the story. The year is 1720. A company with an optimistic name offers shares to a hungry public. The stock goes from £100 to £1,000 in a matter of months. Everyone piles in, dukes and duchesses, poets and scientists, shopkeepers and chimney sweeps. Even Isaac Newton buys in, loses the equivalent of 20 years' salary, and famously remarked that he could calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies, but not the madness of the people. Then it crashes. Thousands are ruined. Suicide is rampant. A nation learns a bitter lesson about the dangers of speculation and human greed. This is the story we've inherited, the first great stock market bubble, the original sin of modern finance, the cautionary tale taught in every business school. And it is, for the most part, the wrong story. Here is what doesn't add up. The King of England was the official governor of the South Sea Company. Half the cabinet held shares. Parliament, far from trying to stop the mania, actively passed laws that helped the company expand and crushed its competitors. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, the man in charge of the nation's finances, was one of the scheme's principal architects. If this was a reckless private scheme run by con men and stock jobbers, why was the British government so deeply involved from the very beginning? Why were the most powerful people in the country not just invested, but actively designing the rules to make the stock go up? The South Sea bubble wasn't a private scheme that got out of hand. It was the government's plan from the start. To understand the South Sea Company, you have to start not with trade or exploration, but with debt. By 1711, Britain could no longer service its debts. The War of the Spanish Succession had dragged on for over a decade. The national debt stood at £31 million, and the government was struggling to make the interest payments. Credit was tight. Investors were nervous. The country needed a way to restructure its obligations without defaulting. Robert Harley, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, had an idea. He created a new company called the South Sea Company. Officially, it was a trading company with a monopoly on trade with South America, hence the name. In practice, it was a financial vehicle. The company would take on government debt. Holders of government bonds would exchange their bonds for shares in the South Sea Company. The bondholders got stock that paid a reliable dividend. The government got lower interest rates and a single, manageable creditor instead of thousands of scattered bondholders. This was, in essence, a debt-for-equity swap, an arrangement where creditors trade their debt claims for ownership shares in the entity that owes them money. And it worked well enough for the first few years. The stock traded steadily. The government made its payments. Nobody got rich, and nobody got ruined. So what does this mean? It means the South Sea Company was never really a trading company. It was a government debt management tool, dressed up as a commercial venture. And that fact is the key to everything that happened next. Then came 1720, and the deal that turned a stable financial arrangement into one of the most famous bubbles in history. The government proposed a new agreement. The South Sea Company would take on the rest of the national debt, the entire remaining sum, in exchange for more shares. But here was the crucial detail, and the detail that almost nobody talks about: the number of shares the company would issue was not fixed. It depended on the market price of the stock. The higher the stock price went, the fewer shares the company had to issue to absorb the debt. The difference between the debt value and the value of the shares issued was pure profit for the company. And since the company's directors and their political allies held huge blocks of shares, a higher stock price meant more money for them personally. The government didn't just passively allow the bubble. It had a direct financial incentive to inflate it. And inflate it they did, with every lever the state could reach. The company marketed shares directly to the public, with installment payment plans so that even people of modest means could buy in. They hosted lavish public events. They spread rumors of lucrative trading deals in the Americas. Most importantly, they bribed members of parliament and senior court officials with discounted shares, essentially giving away the upside in exchange for political protection and favorable legislation. The culmination was the Bubble Act of 1720, passed by Parliament at the company's urging. Officially, it was a law to curb reckless speculation. In practice, it banned all other joint stock companies that hadn't received a royal charter, which meant every competing investment opportunity was shut down. Money that might have gone elsewhere had nowhere to go but into South Sea stock. The government was effectively channeling capital into the bubble. The stock went from £100 at the start of the year to nearly £1,000 by midsummer. And the people who engineered it, the ministers, the MPs, the court favorites, made fortunes. The crash came in the late summer of 1720. The stock peaked, then fell faster. By the end of the year it was back below £200. Thousands of people who'd bought in at the top lost everything. The public was furious. And here is where the second part of the mechanism kicked in, the cover-up. Parliament held investigations. The company directors were put on trial. Their estates were seized and redistributed to the victims. They were publicly shamed, expelled from office, and made the face of the scandal. The story of greedy speculators and crowd madness was born. But the politicians who had designed the scheme, the ministers who'd accepted bribes in the form of discounted shares, the ones who'd passed the Bubble Act and overseen the entire operation, most of them walked away. The Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, John Illaby, was expelled from Parliament and briefly imprisoned, but the broader architecture of government policy was never put on trial. The system itself was never the defendant. The public got its villains. The government got its debt restructured. And the narrative that stuck was the one about greedy speculators and the madness of crowds. It was politically very convenient. If the most famous bubble of the 18th century was actually a government financial operation dressed up as a private mania, what does that tell us about bubbles today? The real insight here isn't about the South Sea Company, and it isn't about 1720. It's about where financial bubbles actually come from. The largest and most damaging financial bubbles are almost never pure private sector manias. They happen when governments have a reason to want asset prices to rise. Sometimes it's to fund a war. Sometimes it's to reduce a debt burden. Sometimes it's to create a feeling of wealth that helps win elections. Sometimes it's all three. The pattern is consistent. Governments create the conditions. They loosen the rules. They provide the credit. They stand aside and take credit for the prosperity during the boom. And when it all falls apart, they express outrage, hold hearings, and blame the speculators. The public always remembers the greedy bankers. It rarely remembers the policymakers who built the stage. This is why the South Sea story still matters. It's not an example of crowd madness. It's an example of how state power and private finance combine to create bubbles, and how the state always walks away from the wreckage with its reputation intact. You can see the exact same pattern in the 2008 housing crisis. For decades, government policy actively encouraged the expansion of homeownership. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, government-sponsored enterprises created by Congress, bought up trillions of dollars worth of mortgages, providing the liquidity that allowed lenders to keep making loans. Regulators praised the ownership society. Politicians from both parties took credit for rising home values. Lending standards collapsed, and almost nobody in power wanted to stop it, because rising house prices made everyone feel richer and made the economy look good. When it crashed, greedy bankers took the blame. There were hearings. There were fines. There were speeches about Wall Street excess. The government's central role in inflating the bubble, the decades of policy, the government-sponsored enterprises, the regulatory forbearance, was barely discussed in the popular narrative. The pattern is the same. Only the costumes change. The South Sea Bubble wasn't a story about crowd madness. It was a story about a government using financial engineering to solve its problems, and letting the public take the blame when it went wrong. 300 years later, the mechanism is still the same, and so is the story we tell ourselves afterward. The next time you hear about a bubble caused by greedy speculators, ask a different question. Ask who stood to benefit from the boom. Ask who wrote the rules. Ask who was standing in the room when the whole thing was set up. If you want to drift through the full story over 3 hours, the backroom deals in Parliament, the bribes, the show trials, and the birth of the modern national debt, in the slow, detailed version made for quiet nights, the link is in the description.